Hello, welcome to Mandibil. You might be a little surprised about the title of this video here. It goes against my prior planning and my prior scope of my philosophy. Just goes to show you how, or it just goes to show how sort of dynamic you have to be when doing philosophy. It's a constant molding, right? And I think also as I progress further to the end of this line of my philosophy, I get closer to the topics or the chapters or parts are less and less carved in stone, if you know what I mean, right? So these areas are something that I have dealt the least with until now. Because I have, a general notion that the deeper the level, the more important. Not that something here is unimportant, but as I have stated a lot of times prior in earlier videos and way back in time, right? That the earlier in your journey that you take the wrong left turn or right turn, the more wrong you will end, right? If I make an error during ethics, it's like if I need to go to Paris from Copenhagen, then if I'm in Paris, that's ethics. I'm doing ethics, and the moral principle is the Eiffel Tower, right? So if I go wrong in Paris, I'm still in Paris, right? But if I go wrong in my ontology, I'm basically getting lost in Copenhagen. That's a different story, right? If you understand my analogy, right? So I have had a tendency to focus on the deeper ends, and so far, all else equal, have done less philosophy at this end of my scope of my philosophy, right? Okay. So what I have come up with is I am splitting objectivology, or I'm extracting a part of objectivology that I call communicationology. just to be a little, I'm stabbing a bit at academia by creating completely ridiculous labels here, right? Ologies and isms like they do. They create isms. That this guy who recently presented or made an overview of the 325 plus theories, quote, about consciousness, right? So I'm making my own, right? Of course I can. It's my philosophy. I can do whatever I want, right? And it's actually maybe if anything, your takeaway from this should be, I can do whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. Don't let anybody tell you anything, right? So, and it's also something that is sort of embedded in my philosophy in a way, you could say, because it just falls out of the ontology and the rejection of metaphysics, right? It just falls out that, well, what you have to work with is you, right? All of this is me. Yes, I am treating you as some part of an external world, but it's all based on my personal experiences, my phenomena, right? It's me acting, thinking, and so on, as if there is something out there, but that I cannot settle. So I'm still sort of locked within my own experience in any case, right? It's sort of when you start to believe your experiences are an external world, you start to, drift the sort of slippery slope into sort of some kind of crony naive realism, maybe you could say, to sort of paraphrase or allude to, crony capitalism, for instance, right? We should have capitalism, but we have to control it, right? We can't have freedom, right? Okay, enough of that. So, as I said, I've come up with a new category that is, sandwiched between individuology and objectivology, because I actually think that yesterday I did some research on how do people actually deal with the idea of communication, and you can get university degrees in communication, right? Maybe it says a thing or two about communication. So it's sort of maybe I should invent a philosophical thing here called communicationology, in order to say there is a particular aspect, things you have to do before you can actually deal with something that is objective, but you are still beyond individual. So it makes sense to have this, though before I just had it as a part of objectology. But as a sort of a look at it, it makes sense to make it its own thing. So, and also it's a love-hate relationship with Microsoft, right? And computers in general. There's this balance between, and there might be some philosophical underpinnings to this, right? Which is software wants to help you, but it can easily switch into be a cumbersome patronizing. And I don't know what it is about, but this sort of diagram I'm showing here, right? It's sort of a ready-made table. I don't remember the term, but you can go in the menu. I'm using the latest version of Office 365 Personal, right? You can go into a ready-made. Okay, you can use this diagram and that diagram. I actually think it's called a diagram, but whatever, it doesn't matter, right? You can see it here. And you can probably find it if you're using Office, right? And you choose this, and then it has sort of put these text in here. When you click on it, another menu pops up, and you can write the text. But when you start to sort of, okay, this text, this box needs to be a little bigger in order to accommodate the text, then it moves all the other boxes around. So if I start to move this box, all the other boxes move. Then I have to adjust them, and then all the other boxes move. It is like, stop doing that, right? And furthermore, the text to the side, when I adjust that also adjusts the boxes. And sort of, it just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So the more I work with it, the less functional it gets. I don't know the rationale behind this. Because yes, if you just use 3 boxes, which is the starting point, or maybe 4 boxes, I don't remember, and you only use the text size that is already defined, it kind of works. But as you start adding boxes and arrows and text, it just sort of, it's a monstrosity, right? But I have started using it, so now I'm staying with it, right? This is the best I could come up with. And I have removed some text in order to not deal with it. So I've removed all the ones we have done so far, right? And it's sort of, I don't know what it is, or if there's some kind of maybe wokeism that is sort of infecting development, or modern times of agile project management, the unimagined, unwanted side effects of this way of managing projects and development are creating this kind of confused I am not necessarily a proponent of agile project management. I'm not going to make myself, it's sort of the latest thing. It's the so ein Ding muss ich auch haben, right? I think that project management and agile is sort of striking fear into management. First of all, agile project management challenges old school management structures, right? Rather than having top down, it's more like it's flat. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad to have a flatter structure and cross-functional structures or whatever. But there were some benefits from having a top down, right? I mean, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, right? Highly successful structures, but it's fucking pyramid structure, right? So there might be some rationales that are locked into a more top-down structure where few people are rolling out or implementing their rationales for why we are doing this. The rationales are being left on the wayside in the attempt to be at the state of the art of this development, in the fear of the competition trying to take you over and you're losing market shares and so on, right? So it's like, let's go, right? And everybody's scrambling, but nobody is really on top of things. And what I have seen is that what they then do, management, they bring in some fucking dictator to control all this. So now they not only have a top down, they have dictatorships, right? Out of the fear of anarchy. So be careful with agile, right? I actually think that there are too many parameters working at once, and you don't have an overview of, if I move this one a bit to the left, what happens? If I move this one to the left and that one to the right and something happens, was it because of this one or was it because of that one? It can go too fast for people to be able to adapt and catch up with what the hell is going on. So then they have to rely on some dictator telling them what to do. And I think that's what's happening in Agile, in my opinion. It's too much, too fast. Just my 2 cents, right? Okay, so let me get into communicationology. As I mentioned in one of the comment videos to your comments, is that Johnny Isometric complained, quote, in a funny way about, no, master, don't change the rules, right? And I was like, I have altered the deal. It's Darth Vader. Now I've altered the scope of my philosophy, right? Pray I don't alter it any further, right? Okay, enough of that. Next slide. Okay, so I have added a few things, rearranged maybe a little. So now I need to get into the sort of the Cartesian idea of the me, right? Because if I'm communicating, I am sort of creating an abstract idea of me as a similar concept. And if it's the me in the now, it could be a pretense or an abstraction of an individual, knowledge of me in a world, represented, a kind of representation of another individual, sort of stepping almost outside myself, right? So I'm sort of having somebody that is me communicating with an individual. It's sort of an abstract, and don't overinterpret it. But I think it's kind of necessary to establish sort of a visual representation of what I'm doing here. So just for the sake of illustration, I'm sort of making a manifestation of the me, but I want to stress that this is an abstraction. Me is not a cognition, right? I'm not cognizing me. I am a bundle of phenomena, as Hume would say, right? I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact quote, but maybe I could bring it up. But there's so much to like about Hume and his approach to philosophy. I mean, in my opinion, he's the only philosopher you might be really inspired by. There are a few things here and there with other philosophers, but if you really want to get, he's skeptic, he has a procedure, and then he's skeptic, and then a new procedure. It's a good approach. Hume is by far the best philosopher, in my opinion. That's my opinion. If you want to study other philosophers, apart from me, right? You might want to start with Hume. You could do worse than that, in my opinion, right? I wouldn't start with Plato or Nietzsche or Hegel or idealists, right? Start with Hume, I would say, and take it from there and get inspired. But always make sure that your philosophy is the cornerstone. Everything else is just inspiration. You have to do your philosophy. Nobody else can do it. Nobody else should do it. You're going to have to do it. Take responsibility of your own thinking, right? Okay, so I am establishing the me, and I'm not going to have to tell you about you. Your me. This is my me, right? Okay, so it's an abstraction that establishes or treats the me as a kind of abstract individual on the same level as an individual in order to establish communication. So basically I am saying that individual also has a me, right? So you can sort of switch them around depending on which one you're dealing with. I just can't get to the other me, but I have the individual to work with. And in order to those two sort of come together, I need a connection, and that is the lingo or what is established by communication theory here, right? Or communicationology. I am establishing a procedure and sort of a lingo, or not establishing. I'm appealing to it, but I'm staying very meta here, because as we get further down the line and closer to what you might call reality and the direct everyday experience and so on, I have to leave more and more and more to myself and therefore to yourself, right? I'm getting to a sort of meta level that where that I can describe methods and principles and axioms maybe and so on, but I'm not addressing something in particular, right? It's this, if my the hypothetical moral scenario that Johnny Isometric appealed to was, what if 60%, that's too, 60% taxes or whatever it was, that's too close to actual situations. And he's also a hypothetical about where this philosophy of mine might lead. And it's kind of sophist. Be careful, Johnny Isometric. You're trying to manipulate, right? You're trying to forego where it goes in order to maybe trying to stop me from going there, because you might be realizing at the end of this road I'm going here, right? That might end up in a moral principle that you cannot refute. And then you might think or feel that you need to follow it. And following it might leave you with the conclusion that prior to this, you haven't been, or in some cases at least, you might not have been perfectly moral, right? And this might be one of the reasons why people actually are not really very keen on doing ethics when you really dig in, right? Because what they might find out, they have to say, when I did that back in the day, and my wife can remember things, my children can remember things, my boss can remember things, and so on, right? And beyond that, if you can't refute a moral principle of mine, and you don't have one of your own, based on your own philosophy, that is somewhat similar to mine, in structure and process and so on, then why would you reject mine if you don't have your own? And you can refute my philosophy. Then you're basically saying, I don't give a shit. And you would be one of those individuals I would have to reject, right? You see how things start to bind together. So, and that's why I'm not answering any hypotheticals about moral situations when we haven't even settled objectivity and how we're going to interact and how so on and so on and so on, and the moral principle we haven't agreed upon, right? So I have the idea of the me, and I suppose that you have that also. How you do that, I can never get to. Even if you communicate, you might be lying and manipulating. I can tell. For sure, right? So, first I would like to have an initiation phase, which is the phase before an individual is aware of your presence. Because if the other one is aware of your presence, you might jump to the sort of next phase, right? Or point 4, which is fleeing. So initiation phase is where you are, maybe I should have written that in the text here. When you are aware of another, let's say another individual, but I'm over speaking here. When you are aware of an individual, then I would say the initiation is first, as I say, is there an individual, right? There's a grammatic error there, spelling error. That's the first one. Is there an individual? Yes, there is, otherwise you wouldn't be initiating. So it's not maybe step 1, it's step before initiation, right? Observe the qualia, right? How does it look? Does it have an interesting, does it have a weird color? Does it make weird sounds? What are your fear responses? Is there something that sort of emotionally tells you there's something wrong here, right? Maybe the sounds it makes, maybe, it's the color it has, or something like that. Maybe I should also have a point that says shape. Is it very large? Is it very small? Is it very fat, very thin? Whatever, right? Maybe shape also, but you could put that into qualia, right? So maybe it's the sort of limitations and qualities of an individual, but you know what I'm going, right? Now, observe how it moves. Do you have any fear responses from the movement? I'm appealing to abstractions here again, right? So I kind of misspoke back earlier when I said I'm leaving abstractions behind when I step out of ontology or get further from ontology. That was really bad statement. So I am basically quite often actually, more than I haven't even realized, I'm actually appealing a lot to abstractions. But there's a reason why they're there, right? You use them maybe all the time, even without knowing it or realizing it or being aware of it. So abstractions, emotions, desires, fear responses, and so on, these are very important. And wouldn't you know, civilizing children is about subduing their ability to use their abstractions and fear responses. And so there's something wrong with you if you don't like to sit in a school for 10 years, being lectured and bullied by the other children and dominated by your teachers, right? There's something wrong with you, child. Subdue. Yeah, right? That's why we get bad psychology and we get people like Freud and Jung and so on, right? It's not that complicated, really. Okay. Observe qualia closely, right? Fear responses and other responses, whatever responses, right? And observe the movement and what is your response. Then you need to decide, do I want to communicate or do I not want to communicate? And you probably want to flee the situation or at least put distance between you and the individual. And I'm saying individuals because there might be more than one, right? They might be in a situation where they are communicating and they have started to work together, right? But you're not a part of that, to the best of your understanding of your cognitions and your recognitions maybe, right? So decide whether to communicate or flee. And flee, I mean, what alternative you might have for the situation when you don't want to communicate. So it's sort of a fork in the road here. Do I want to communicate or don't I want to communicate? And you want to get, you might, if you don't want to communicate, it doesn't really matter if the other one wants to communicate because you've decided you don't want to. It's not, I don't think I want to communicate. And the other one starts to wave or something. I mean, you might be sort of on a gray zone where you say, I'm not sure about this one. And if it starts to look all of a sudden friendly, but you know, careful. You just had some fear responses maybe. So just because it starts to look, oh, I'm so nice. Oh, showing in the tits and whatever, right? It's like, maybe it's manipulating you. Maybe it's manipulating your emotions. Maybe you should flee. In any case, right? If you've decided to flee, it's sort of getting away from its ability to manipulate you. You don't know what philosophy this thing might have come up with. It might have done something that you haven't even imagined. And you are being led by your, your abstractions and emotions, right? You might be tricked somehow. So if you decide not to communicate, you better get out of the way, in my opinion, right? It's your decision. Don't let something else inflict themselves on your decision to whether to engage or not. But then, if you decide to initiate communication, maybe we have a situation something like this. That in order to communicate, you have to establish some way you want to do that. And I call that a lingo, right? Your lingo is your choice of method of communication. I'm not going to tell you what that would be. Who am I to tell you, right? You choose that. But I'm going to refer to that lingo of yours using particular terms that I think are some kind of necessity of a content of that method of lingo or lingo you're using, right? Method of communication. So, first of all, I would make a gesture at the individual to get attention, and that indicates that you want to communicate. So this might be a difficult moment, because if you look threatening, you're probably not going to get the communication, right? If you say, right, it might not be the best gesture, right? So figure out a good gesture to indicate that you want to communicate, right? But keep a distance. If the individual's approaches, or you are moving, right? Maybe I should have said that, but this is sort of the relativity of it. So if you approach, you could say the distance. Maybe you should have said, yeah, you know what I mean. I don't need to spell it out for you, right? But keep a distance. Maybe it's just point 2 should be keep a distance, a minimum distance, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay. 3, make the individuals understand that you can defend yourself to keep the safe distance, right? You need to make sure that they understand you're not there just for, scrounging. What's it called? If you're just sitting there like you're a dead person, right? Whatever it takes to make sure that they're not running away, but they're not coming too close, right? You have to keep a safe distance so that you can flee in the case that you change your mind, right? Decide if the situation seems safe enough for further communication with the individuals. Yes. Attempt objectivity. If yes, attempt objectivity, and then we're going into objectivology, which I mentioned was the next step now, right? And if not, flee. But you shouldn't be able to put yourself in a situation when you're attempting to communicate that inhibits your ability to flee, right? If the other one says, well, you have to sit in this box I have made in order to communicate with me. It's like, no thank you, I'm going that way, right? So, these are, you understand, if you want to make sure that this philosophy here I'm doing is very precise, it indicates that deep down you actually understand this is very important. This is, individuals are possibly the most dangerous interactions you can have, right? What else could it be? Think of it through your life. What is it that has fucked most with you, right? And I don't mean sex. I mean in the sense of made more or less devastating impact on your life. It's always human beings. You might have been bitten by a dog at some time, right? You might have fucked up a situation where God damn, I was stupid there, right? I did something and I fell, and you're your own worst enemy, right? But think of it. Those who fucked up your life most, I bet you it was an individual or some kind of conglomeration of individuals, right? And maybe it's even worse. You have been trained by some of these individuals to not think of it that way. It was always your own fault, right? This is very important. This is hugely important. You're engaging with me. How do you know I'm not trying to fool you? You only have your own emotions and measure sticks, philosophy and emotions and so on to guide you, right? I can say all I want. Oh no! I don't want to. I don't want to do anything to you. I might be a fucking crazy person. You have to judge that. How do you do that? Well, how about making your own philosophy, all right? And if you have trouble making your own philosophy, how do you judge whether somebody else's philosophy, because you're doing something? You do work for some kind of philosophy. Saying that you don't have a philosophy is actually saying, I'm just doing what somebody else tells me to do. So you're using somebody else's philosophy. How did you check out whether or not that philosophy was actually worthwhile or functional or not filled with flaws and actually built to control you and manipulate you and take advantage of you some way or another, right? So at the end of the day, you can't get around that you need to think for yourself. There is no way around it. And my philosophy also sort of states that, well, if you are interacting with an individual who doesn't have a philosophy, it doesn't work. I have to pull out, right? Don't engage. So if my philosophy ultimately at some point gets traction, it doesn't look like at this point, right? If I get like 100 and 200 views on YouTube, but maybe over time, you know, how many books did Nietzsche sell, right? Like 150 books. He knew all the names of the people who had bought his books because there was a few of them, right? And now everybody seems to like Nietzsche, right? So it's, there's an, people want a quick fix, right? They want, rather than start to do the hard work of thinking for themselves, they want to appeal to somebody who can give them some shit so they can get through life in a decent manner without doing all that hard work, right? But then they have to give up some of their freedom. That's politics. And that slippery slope of giving up your freedom in order to avoid to do the hard work yourself is starting to manifest, I think, right? You're seeing the dire consequences of this. And if anything, that was also what Nietzsche probably appealed to, right? You have to do some hard work. Otherwise, somebody's going to use you and manipulate you to get control of everybody, right? Okay. Give me a comment. What do you think about this? Are there some glaring holes here somewhere? Something I haven't, dealt with? I didn't mention, I put that lingo I mentioned as a connection point between individual and me, right? Because in a sense, abstractly seen, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to connect in a way, right? And it's still abstract. I'm not making a connection that can be cognized, anything like that. But I am making qualia using an abstraction called me, and using some qualia, which is either movement, or maybe you couldn't call that movement. Maybe that's the closest thing to using cognitions. I'm using movement, like raising my hand or whatever it might be, or maybe making sounds, or taking objects and showing, whatever it is, right? Let's say qualia and cognitions. And that's why it's also traversing through cognitions and qualia, right? So it's sort of an illustration of it. To keep all the philosophy sort of condensed into this, it's somewhat abstract in its way. But I hope it comes across sort of the simplicity of it. It's not that complicated, really. It only becomes complicated when you don't know what you're doing, or you have all your dogma you need to bring along. So it compounds and inflates and bloats out of recognition, and you're stranded somewhere in epistemology and you don't know what the fuck to do, right? There's so many moving parts that it's just useless, right? That's what I desperately trying to avoid, and I'm not desperate about it. It's actually pretty simple. You just have to stick to what you have done so far and build from that, and you can then use that to build further from that, and so on and so on and so on, until you get to the finishing line, right? Wherever that may be. Okay, maybe the last slide. I have added a method here down below, which is use initiation and communication procedures that I just mentioned for dealing with individuals. So I keep it simple. You have to think for yourself. But I think you need to come up with this kind of method. That's as much as I'm saying, because I'm leaving as much as possible for you to engage with. I'm not telling anybody to go left and right. Huh? But I'm keeping it confined to, okay, I think you need to have a method for this. So if I'm establishing something with you, I might want to do, okay, what is your method for doing this? And if you don't have anything that resembles that, it might be a problem, right? It's very likely to be a problem. But your philosophy might have another structure. So I need to sort of engage with your philosophy and say, oh, okay, I see it fits with my philosophy this way. Maybe we can come to some agreement somewhere, right? Okay. So far so good. See you in the next one.